Some nights the forest goes quiet for a reason, not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that means something out there already knows you're listening. Tonight's stories were sent to me by people who came back from the wilderness changed. Not physically, not obviously, just different. The way a person looks different when something has decided it isn't finished with them yet. I've been sitting with these stories for a while before recording this. I needed to. You'll understand why when you hear them. If you're new here, subscribe now, not after. And leave the lights on, or don't. Honestly, at this point it won't matter either way. Let's go. The thin line between adventure and disaster often blurs in the wilderness. That's what I discovered during what was supposed to be a simple vacation to Glacier National Park in September 2019. My name is Eamon Gallagher, and back in 2019, I took my old RV up to Glacier National Park in Montana. I've always fancied myself a bit of an adventurer, even though the closest I've come to roughing it is microwaving day-old pizza. After years stuck behind a desk crunching numbers, I decided it was time to embrace the great outdoors. I figured what better way to reconnect with nature than by parking my home on wheels in the middle of a national park. Plus, if things got too wild, I'd still have Wi-Fi and a comfy bed. I arrived at the park on a crisp September morning. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of solitude. As I navigated my RV through the winding roads, I couldn't help but marvel at the towering mountains and the glacial lakes that mirrored the sky. It was a far cry from the concrete jungle I was used to. I settled into a secluded spot near Lake McDonald. There were a few other campers nearby, a retired couple named Harold and Mabel, and a solo hiker named Lucy, who seemed more comfortable with a backpack than I was with my RV's GPS system. "First time here?" Harold asked as I awkwardly hooked up my RV's utilities. "Is it that obvious?" I chuckled. "Just a bit," Mabel smiled. "Don't worry, everyone starts somewhere." Over the next couple of days, I got to know my neighbors. Harold was a former engineer who retired early to travel the country. Mabel was an artist, capturing landscapes with watercolors that seemed to bring them to life. Lucy was a wildlife photographer chasing after elusive creatures most people only see on postcards. One evening, we all gathered around a campfire. The sky was a tapestry of stars, and the crackling fire provided a cozy warmth against the chilly air. "You ever hear about the park's hidden trails?" Lucy asked, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Hidden trails?" I raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like the start of a bad horror movie." "Or a good adventure," she retorted. "There's one that leads to an old ranger station, abandoned for years." "Why was it abandoned?" Harold inquired. "Rumor has it there was an incident." Lucy lowered her voice for dramatic effect. "A ranger went missing and they never found him." "Well, that's not ominous at all," I quipped. "Maybe he just got lost trying to find a decent cell signal." We all laughed, but there was an undercurrent of intrigue. Despite my better judgment, I felt drawn to the idea of exploring the unknown. After all, wasn't that why I came here? That night, as the embers of the campfire died down and my neighbors retired to their shelters, I sat alone outside my RV. The darkness of the wilderness was different from city darkness, deeper, more absolute. The stars seemed brighter, more numerous, their light barely penetrating the dense canopy of trees surrounding our campsite. A chill wind picked up, rustling through the forest. The sound of branches creaking and leaves whispering created an eerie symphony. I wrapped my jacket tighter around myself, trying to shake off the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me from the tree line. "Just your imagination," I muttered to myself. "This isn't a horror movie." But as I turned to enter my RV, I caught a glimpse of movement in the periphery of my vision. A shadow, darker than the night itself, slipping between the distant trees. By the time I spun around, whatever it was had vanished. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. The comfortable interior of my RV suddenly seemed flimsy protection against the vastness of the wilderness outside. I told myself it was probably just a deer or some other harmless wildlife. Sleep came fitfully that night, my dreams filled with shadowy figures and endless dark forests. I woke several times, convinced I'd heard footsteps circling my RV, but each time I peered through the windows, I saw nothing but the silent night. Dawn brought clarity, and with it, embarrassment at my nocturnal fears. The forest looked innocent in the morning light, the shadows retreating as sunbeams filtered through the canopy. I made coffee and sat outside, watching the mist rise from the lake. Lucy approached, camera dangling from her neck. "Morning, city boy. Sleep well?" "Like a baby," I lied. "So, about that abandoned ranger station." Her eyes lit up. "Want to check it out?" I hesitated, remembering my irrational fears from the night before. But in the light of day, adventure seemed more appealing than caution. "Why not? Not like I've got a busy schedule of Netflix and microwave dinners out here." She laughed. "Great. We can head out tomorrow morning. I'll bring a map." That day passed pleasantly enough. I hiked some of the easier trails with Harold and Mabel, took photos of these spectacular vistas, and even caught myself enjoying the absence of email notifications. The forest, which had seemed so threatening in the dark, was magnificent in daylight. Ancient trees reaching skyward, wildflowers dotting the undergrowth, and the occasional glimpse of wildlife darting between the foliage. As evening approached, we again gathered around the campfire. The conversation flowed easily, stories exchanged between new friends. But when Lucy mentioned our planned expedition for the next day, a shadow seemed to pass over Harold's weathered face. "The old North Fork station?" he asked, his tone strangely flat. Lucy nodded. "You know it?" "I've heard stories," Harold replied, poking at the fire with a stick. "Nothing good." "Oh?" I prompted, curiosity piqued. Harold glanced at Mabel, who nodded slightly. "They say the ranger who went missing, Thomas Reed, wasn't just lost. Some believe he went mad. Lost his family in a fire the year before, never was the same after." "That's terrible," I said, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "The official report said he wandered off during a routine patrol," Harold continued. "But there were rumors, strange symbols found in his quarters, journals filled with ramblings about the watching woods and eyes in the dark." "Harold, you're scaring them," Mabel chided gently. "Maybe they should be scared," he replied. "The wilderness isn't forgiving of mistakes." A heavy silence fell over our little circle. The crackling fire seemed louder somehow, the shadows at the edge of our camp deeper and more substantial. "Well," Lucy finally spoke, her usual enthusiasm slightly dimmed. "I still want to see it. For the photos, you know? And I'm still game," I added, though with less conviction than before. "Besides, it's probably just an old cabin falling apart by now." Harold nodded slowly. "Just stay on the marked trails as much as possible, and be back before dark." "Yes, Dad," Lucy joked, but the humor felt forced. Later, as I prepared for bed, I found myself once again peering into the darkness beyond my RV's windows. The forest seemed alive with whispers and movements, the trees swaying slightly though there was no wind. And just before I closed the curtains, I could have sworn I saw a pale face watching me from between the distant trunks. Gaunt, hollow-eyed, gone in an instant when I blinked. Sleep was even more elusive that night, and when it came, it brought dreams of pursuit through endless woods, of symbols carved in flesh and of a voice that whispered from the shadows. "The watching woods see all who enter." The next morning, I woke with a sense of foreboding that coffee couldn't quite dispel. Outside my RV, the world was shrouded in fog, the trees appearing and disappearing like ghostly sentinels as the mist swirled and shifted. Lucy arrived at my campsite just after dawn, her backpack bulging with gear and her face alight with excitement that seemed at odds with the somber morning. "Ready for our adventure?" she asked, adjusting her camera strap. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, hefting my own hastily packed bag. Though I'm beginning to think I should have stayed with my original vacation plan of binge-watching documentaries in air-conditioned comfort. "Where's your sense of adventure?" "Probably left it in my other pants," I quipped, but followed her toward the trailhead nonetheless. After a couple of hours, we reached a clearing where the remains of the old ranger station stood. It was a dilapidated wooden structure, windows shattered, and the door hanging off its hinges. "Charming," I remarked. "Looks like the perfect fixer-upper." Lucy began snapping photos. "There's beauty in decay, don't you think?" "I'll take your word for it." As we explored the interior, I noticed strange symbols carved into the walls. Circles intersected by jagged lines, accompanied by words in a language I didn't recognize. "Any idea what this says?" I asked. Lucy shook her head. "Probably just graffiti from other hikers." "Yeah, hikers who carry chisels and have a flair for the dramatic." The interior of the station was a single room, with what remained of a cot in one corner and a rusted stove in another. A table, its surface warped by years of exposure to the elements, stood near the broken window. Papers, yellowed and faded, were scattered across the floor, their contents illegible due to water damage and time. I picked up a fragment of what might have been a journal, but the ink had run, leaving only ghostly impressions of what once had been writing. A photograph, curled and bleached by the sun, showed a young couple with a small child, their faces barely distinguishable. "Think this was him? Reed?" I asked, showing Lucy the photo. She took it carefully, examining it. "Could be. Sad to think of him out here alone, losing his mind." As she spoke, I felt a peculiar sensation, a pressure in my ears, as if the air had suddenly thickened. The light coming through the broken windows seemed to dim, though I could see no clouds outside. "Lucy," I said slowly, "do you feel that?" "Feel what?" But before I could explain, we heard a rustling outside. I peered through the broken window, but saw nothing. "Probably just the wind," Lucy said, though her voice wavered. "Right, the wind, in the form of footsteps." She gave me a nervous smile. "Maybe we should head back." "Best idea you've had all day." We stepped outside, and that's when we saw him. A man standing at the edge of the clearing. He was tall and gaunt, with unkempt hair that framed a face smudged with dirt. His clothes were tattered, hanging loosely on his thin frame. "Hello there," Lucy called out, ever the friendly explorer. The man didn't respond. Instead, he tilted his head, observing us like a predator sizing up its prey. "Maybe he needs help," I whispered. "Or maybe he's admiring your fashion sense," she whispered back. "Cargo shorts are all the rage in the wilderness." "Ha ha," I muttered. "Let's just keep moving." We started walking away, but the man mirrored our movements, maintaining the same distance. "Okay, this is creepy," I admitted. "Agreed," Lucy said, her pace quickening. We veered off the path, hoping to lose him in the thick underbrush. Branches scratched at our arms, and the uneven ground made every step a gamble. "Do you even know where we're going?" I asked. "Back to the main trail, I think." "You think? Got a better idea?" "Yeah, A sudden scream cut through the air. It was Lucy. I turned to see the man had grabbed her, his bony fingers digging into her shoulder. Without thinking, I picked up a fallen branch and swung it at him. "Let her go," I shouted. The branch connected with his back, but he barely flinched. His eyes met mine, cold, devoid of any humanity. He shoved Lucy to the ground and lunged at me. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root and landing hard on my back. The wind was knocked out of me, and before I could react, he was above me, a rusted knife gleaming in his hand. "Wait," I managed to gasp. "We don't want any trouble." He brought the knife down, slicing my arm as I tried to shield myself. Pain shot through me, sharp and searing. "Funny, I always thought getting stabbed would hurt less," I blurted out, adrenaline fueling my sarcasm. "Now's not the time for jokes," Lucy shouted, scrambling to her feet. She threw a rock, hitting the man square in the temple. He grunted, momentarily disoriented. "Run!" she yelled. I didn't need to be told twice. We bolted through the forest, branches whipping against our faces. My arm throbbed, blood seeping through my fingers as I clutched the wound. "Head for the river," Lucy directed. "He might lose our scent there." "Scent? What am I, a deer?" "Just move." We could hear him crashing through the foliage behind us, his footsteps relentless. The sound was a grim reminder that he was not far behind. We reached the riverbank, a steep drop leading to rushing waters below. "Great," I panted. "Now what, we grow wings?" "There's a narrow path along the edge," Lucy pointed. I glanced at the precarious ledge, barely wide enough for a squirrel. "You've got to be kidding." "Do you trust me?" "About as much as I trust gas station sushi, but lead the way." We edged along the cliffside, the river roaring beneath us. One misstep, and we'd be swept away. Halfway across, I felt the ledge crumble slightly under my foot. "Careful," Lucy warned. "No kidding," I muttered. A stone dislodged and fell into the river, vanishing into the white water. I swallowed hard. We made it across, scrambling onto solid ground. For a moment, relief washed over me until I saw him standing ahead of us. Does this guy have a twin?" I asked, my heart sinking. He moved toward us, knife in hand. There was no escape. "Stay behind me," I told Lucy. "Don't be a hero," she protested. "Trust me, heroics aren't my style. I just have a plan." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small canister, bear spray. "Always prepared," I said with a weak smile. "Now you tell me you have that? Better late than never." As he closed in, I aimed and unleashed a cloud of the repellent. He screamed, dropping the knife to claw at his eyes. "Run!" We dashed past him, heading back toward the campsite. The adrenaline blurred the passage of time. All I knew was that we had to keep moving. When we finally broke through the tree line, the sight of Harold and Mabel's RV was like seeing the gates of heaven. "Help!" Lucy shouted. Harold emerged, startled. "What on earth happened?" "No time to explain," I said, gasping for breath. "Call the Rangers." We huddled inside their RV, locking the doors. I sank into a chair, my arm throbbing. "You're bleeding," Mabel exclaimed, grabbing a first aid kit. "Yeah, turns out nature doesn't agree with me," I tried to joke, wincing as she cleaned the wound. Harold was on the radio, frantically trying to reach park authorities. Minutes later, which felt like hours, we saw the flashing lights of a ranger's vehicle. Officer Daniels stepped out, a stern look on his face. "Can someone tell me what's going on?" We recounted the events, describing the man who attacked us. Officer Daniels listened intently, his weathered face revealing little emotion. Only when we mentioned the symbols carved into the walls of the ranger station did a flicker of recognition cross his features. "Did he say anything?" Daniels asked. "Not a word," I replied, but he wasn't exactly the chatty type. "We'll conduct a search," he assured us. As the rangers combed the area, we stayed close to the campsite. The atmosphere was tense, the serenity of the park shattered. By nightfall, Daniels returned. We found signs of someone living in the old ranger station. Supplies, makeshift bedding, but no sign of the individual you described. "Great," I sighed. "So he's still out there?" "We'll keep patrols active," he said. "In the meantime, I suggest you stay within the main areas of the park. Believe me, I've had enough adventure for a lifetime." That night, sleep was elusive. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig set my nerves on edge. I sat outside my RV, a flashlight in one hand and the bear spray in the other. Lucy joined me, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Not exactly the restful getaway I planned," I admitted. "At least you have a story to tell," she offered. "Yeah, what I did on my vacation. Got stabbed by a lunatic. Real crowd pleaser." She chuckled softly. "You handled yourself well back there." "Thanks, though next time I'll stick to stories around the campfire." We sat in silence for a while, the night sounds of the forest surrounding us. Despite the ranger's presence, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that somewhere in the darkness beyond our little circle of light, cold eyes were observing our every move. "Those symbols," Lucy finally spoke. "They weren't random graffiti, were they?" I shook my head. "I don't think so. They seemed deliberate, like they meant something. And Daniels recognized them. Did you notice?" I nodded. "Yeah, he definitely knew something, but why wouldn't he tell us?" Lucy shrugged. "Maybe he didn't want to scare us more than we already were." "Great job on that front," I muttered. The night deepened around us. The moon, nearly full, cast an eerie silver light over the campsite. Shadows stretched and shifted, playing tricks on my already frayed nerves. "I'm going to try to get some sleep," Lucy said, standing. "You should too." "Right behind you," I lied. After she left, I remained outside, unable to face the confines of my RV. The darkness seemed alive, pulsing with malevolent energy. I found myself studying the tree line, searching for any sign of movement, any indication that our attacker had followed us back. Hours passed. The campfire burned down to embers, the night grew colder. Just as exhaustion began to overtake my vigilance, I heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound, like someone humming a simple melody. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The humming grew louder, closer. I strained my eyes, trying to pierce the darkness beyond the dying firelight. And then I saw it. A figure, moving between the trees. Not approaching, just circling, observing. I reached for the radio Harold had lent me, my fingers fumbling with the dial. "Officer Daniels," I whispered urgently. "There's someone at the campsite, Site 14, near Lake McDonald." Static crackled, then Daniels' voice came through, sounding distant and distorted. "Stay inside, officers on the way." I retreated to my RV, locking the door behind me. The humming continued, seeming to come from all directions now. I peered through the window, but the figure had vanished. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching into eternity. The radio remained silent. No flashing lights appeared on the access road. A sharp rap on the RV door made me jump. I clutched the bear spray tighter. "Eamon?" It was Harold's voice. "You in there, son?" Relief flooded through me. I opened the door to find Harold standing there, shotgun in hand. "Heard you call the Rangers," he said. "Thought I'd check on you." "There was someone out there," I explained. "Humming." Harold's expression darkened. "Stay here. I'll have a look around." "Wait." But he was already moving away, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness. I stood in the doorway, indecision paralyzing me. Should I follow him? Close the door? Call out to wake the others? Before I could decide, a scream shattered the night. Not Harold's, but high-pitched, agonized. It seemed to come from the direction of Lucy's tent. I bolted toward the sound, all caution forgotten. Harold was already there, his flashlight illuminating a scene from a nightmare. Lucy's tent was shredded, as if something had torn through it from the outside. Blood spattered the tattered fabric, gleaming wetly in the beam of the flashlight. "Lucy?" I called, my voice breaking. No answer. Only the soft rustle of leaves in the night breeze. "Where is she?" I asked Harold, panic rising. "I don't know." His voice was grim. "But we need to find her. Now." We woke Mabel, who immediately took charge, her earlier grandmotherly demeanor replaced by steely determination. "Harold, get the emergency flares from the RV," she directed. "Eamon, try the radio again. Tell them we have a missing camper, possible injuries." I grabbed the radio, but all I got was static. "It's not working," I reported. "The landline in the ranger station at the entrance," Mabel said. "It's our best bet." "That's 2 miles away," Harold objected. "Then we better get moving," she replied. We gathered what supplies we could: flashlights, Harold's shotgun, my bear spray, a first aid kit from Mabel's RV. The night had grown preternaturally quiet, the usual chorus of nocturnal creatures silenced. "Stay close," Harold advised as we set off toward the main road. The forest seemed different at night, malevolent. Trees that had provided welcome shade during the day now loomed like specters, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Every shadow concealed potential danger, every sound a possible threat. We had gone perhaps half a mile when Mabel suddenly stopped. "Did you hear that?" We listened. At first I heard nothing, then faintly, a voice, Lucy's voice, calling for help. "This way." I started toward the sound, but Harold grabbed my arm. "Wait," he cautioned. "Something's not right." "What do you mean? That's Lucy." "Is it?" His eyes were hard in the beam of the flashlight. "The voice is coming from the direction of the old ranger station, the one you visited today." A chill ran through me. It could be a trap. "Or she could be hurt and need our help," Mabel said. "We can't just ignore it." After a moment's hesitation, Harold nodded. "We'll approach carefully, together." We altered our course, heading deeper into the forest, following Lucy's increasingly frantic calls for help. The terrain grew more difficult, the undergrowth denser. Several times we had to stop to disentangle ourselves from thorny bushes or navigate around fallen trees. And all the while, Lucy's voice guided us onward, sometimes seeming to come from directly ahead, sometimes from our left or right, but always drawing us deeper into the woods. "We're almost at the old station," Harold murmured. "Everyone stay alert." The clearing appeared suddenly, the dilapidated structure standing in stark relief against the night sky. And there, silhouetted in the doorway, was a figure. "Lucy," I called hesitantly. The figure turned, and in the beam of our flashlights I could see it wasn't Lucy at all. It was him, the gaunt man from the forest, his eyes reflecting the light like an animal's. "Run!" Harold shouted, raising his shotgun. But it was too late. From the shadows around the clearing, more figures emerged. Silent, shambling forms, their features indistinct in the darkness. "Back to the road," Mabel ordered, her voice surprisingly steady. We turned to retreat, only to find our path blocked by more of the silent watchers. We were surrounded. "This way!" Harold charged toward what seemed like a gap in the encircling figures. Mabel and I closed behind. A shadow detached itself from a tree directly in our path. I recognized the gaunt man, now holding what looked like a ceremonial dagger, its blade gleaming in the moonlight. Harold raised his shotgun, but before he could fire, something struck him from behind. He went down with a grunt, the weapon clattering away into the undergrowth. "Harold!" Mabel cried, dropping to her knees beside him. I stood frozen, watching as the circle of silent figures closed in around us. The gaunt man approached, the dagger raised. In the silver moonlight I could see his face clearly for the first time, hollow-cheeked, eyes sunken into dark sockets, lips pulled back in a grimace that might have been a smile. And then, beyond him, I saw another figure emerging from the shadows of the ranger station. Smaller, familiar. "Lucy?" I whispered, disbelieving. But the figure that stepped into the clearing wasn't Lucy. Not anymore. Her face was pale, her movements jerky, unnatural. And her eyes. Her eyes were empty, devoid of the spark that had made her who she was. "What have you done to her?" I demanded, my voice cracking. The gaunt man tilted his head, studying me with those inhuman eyes. And then, for the first time, he spoke, his voice a dry rasp, like dead leaves blown across stone. "The watching woods must be fed." The gaunt man, Reed, I presumed, raised the dagger higher, moonlight catching on its ancient blade. The symbols carved into its handle matched those on the walls of the ranger station. Lucy stood beside him, her expression vacant, body swaying slightly as if moved by an unseen wind. "This is insanity," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let her go. Let us all go." Reed's lips stretched into what might have been a smile on a human face. "None leave the watching woods unmarked." At my feet, Harold groaned, struggling to rise. Mabel helped him up, her face set in grim determination. "Whatever you think you're doing," she addressed Reed directly, "it won't bring your family back." Something flickered in those dead eyes, recognition, pain, humanity briefly resurfacing. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, submerged beneath whatever madness had claimed him. "The woods promised," he rasped. "The old ones promised. Blood for blood. Life for life." "He's completely lost it," I muttered. "Maybe not," Harold whispered. "Divert his attention, I have an idea." Before I could ask what he meant, Mabel stepped forward, drawing Reed's focus. "Thomas Reed," she said clearly, "I knew your wife. Eleanor was a good woman. She wouldn't want this." Reed's hand trembled, the dagger wavering. "Eleanor?" The name seemed to cause him physical pain. While Reed's attention was on Mabel, Harold slowly reached into his jacket pocket, withdrawing something small that glinted in the moonlight. A silver flask. "What happened to your family was tragic," Mabel continued, her voice gentle despite the danger. "But this won't undo it. These people are innocent." "Innocent?" Reed spat the word. "No one is innocent. The woods see all. The woods know." "The woods lie, Thomas," Harold said, unscrewing the flask. "They've been lying to you for years." In a swift motion, Harold flung the contents of the flask at Reed. The liquid, whiskey by the smell of it, splashed across his face and tattered clothes. Reed recoiled, more in surprise than pain. Harold produced a lighter from his pocket, thumb flicking the wheel. "Harold, no!" Mabel cried, but it was too late. The flame caught the alcohol-soaked fabric of Reed's shirt. Fire bloomed, racing up his body. Reed didn't scream. He stood, arms spread wide as the flames consumed him. His followers, if that's what they were, backed away, their shadowy forms retreating into the deeper darkness. Lucy collapsed like a marionette with cut strings. I rushed to her side, checking for a pulse. It was there, weak but steady. "We need to get out of here," Harold urged, supporting Mabel. "Now." I lifted Lucy's unconscious form, struggling under her weight. Behind us, Reed remained standing, a human torch illuminating the clearing. The heat of the flames was intense, already catching on the dry underbrush. "The forest," Mabel gasped. "It's going to burn." "Better it than us," Harold replied grimly. We staggered through the woods, the growing roar of the fire driving us forward. The way seemed clearer now, as if the forest itself was retreating from the flames. Or perhaps it was simply that the shadowy figures that had stalked us were gone, fled back to whatever darkness had spawned them. By the time we reached the main campground, the fire was visible through the trees, a malevolent orange glow consuming the night. Park rangers were already mobilizing, alerted by the smoke and flames. Officer Daniel spotted us emerging from the tree line, his face registering shock at our battered condition and Lucy's unconscious form in my arms. "What happened?" he demanded. "Who started the fire?" "You wouldn't believe us if we told you," I panted, lowering Lucy gently to the ground. "She needs medical attention." The next few hours passed in a blur of sirens, flashing lights, and urgent voices. EMTs arrived, loading Lucy into an ambulance. They checked the rest of us for injuries, cleaning and bandaging the knife wound on my arm. Fire crews battled the blaze, which had spread rapidly through the drought-stricken forest. Officer Daniels questioned us separately, his expression growing increasingly troubled as our stories aligned. When I mentioned the symbols again and the dagger Reed had carried, Daniels exchanged a significant look with a senior ranger I hadn't seen before. "Those markings," I pressed. "You know what they are, don't you?" Daniels hesitated, then nodded. "There are stories about this part of the forest. Old stories from before the park was established. The native tribes avoided it, called it the place where shadows walk." "And you didn't think to warn people?" "They're just stories," he said, but his eyes said otherwise. "Folklore. Nothing substantiated." "Tell that to Lucy," I retorted. "Tell that to Reed's family." Daniels had no answer for that. By morning, the fire was contained, though a significant portion of the forest around the old ranger station had burned. The official story, as I later read in the newspapers, was that a disturbed former park employee had been living off the grid, attacked several campers, and accidentally set fire to the woods during an altercation. No mention was made of the symbols, the dagger, or the silent figures that had surrounded us. No explanation was offered for Lucy's condition, diagnosed as severe shock, from which she eventually recovered, though with no memory of the events after our first encounter with Reed. I visited her in the hospital before leaving Montana. She was pale, diminished somehow, but the spark had returned to her eyes. "The doctors say I should make a full recovery," she told me. "Physically, at least." "And mentally?" She smiled wanly. "Ask me again in a few years of therapy." I took her hand, unsure what to say. How do you comfort someone who's experienced something so far beyond normal understanding? "I keep dreaming about the woods," she said quietly. "Not nightmares, exactly, just whispers, like the trees are trying to tell me something." A chill ran through me. "What do they say?" She shook her head. "I can never quite hear. Maybe that's for the best." Maybe it was. Morning brought a semblance of normalcy. Campers went about their routines, seemingly unaware of the danger lurking in the woods. As I packed up my RV preparing to leave, Harold approached me. "Leaving so soon?" he asked. "Yeah, I think I've overstayed my welcome with Mother Nature." "Can't blame you," he nodded. "But don't let one bad experience keep you from exploring." "I'll keep that in mind. Maybe next time I'll try a beach." He laughed. "Less bears, more sharks." As I drove out of the park, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Questions swirled in my mind. Who was that man? Why did he attack us? What were those symbols and what did they mean? A few days later, I did some digging online. News articles from years ago mentioned a ranger who went missing, Thomas Reed. Rumors suggested he had gone rogue after a personal tragedy, losing his family in an accident. The final line of an old report caught my eye. Authorities believe Reed may still be in the area, living off the grid. His mental state deteriorated. So that was it. A broken man lost in his own wilderness. Or was it? The questions lingered, unanswered. What had he meant by, "the watching woods must be fed"? Who were those silent figures that had surrounded us? And why did I still feel, even hundreds of miles away, that something was watching me from the shadows? I tried to return to my normal life, my job, my apartment, my routine of takeout and Netflix. But something had changed. I found myself avoiding wooded areas, startling at unexpected shadows. Sleep became a luxury, interrupted by dreams of symbols carved into flesh and voices whispering from the dark. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I could swear I heard it. A soft rhythmic humming, like someone just outside my window. A simple melody carried on the night breeze. The melody of the watching woods. They say time heals all wounds. They say distance brings perspective. They're partly right. 6 months after leaving Glacier National Park, I received a package. No return address, just my name and address in neat, precise handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a single item. A small, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. And on the first page, a message. The watching woods are everywhere. They see. They know. They wait. The rest of the journal was filled with the same symbols I had seen in the ranger station, interspersed with fragmentary text, some in English, some in languages I couldn't identify. Diagrams depicted what looked like rituals, sacrifices made to appease something ancient and hungry. I should have burned it, should have thrown it away, ignored it, reported it to the authorities. Instead, I found myself studying it, drawn to the maddening geometries of the symbols, the whispered promises of the text. And as I did, I began to understand what had happened to Thomas Reed. Began to hear the voices he had heard, the call of the watching woods. They're patient, the woods. They can wait decades, centuries, millennia for the right vessel. They found Reed after he lost everything, when his grief and rage left him hollow, ready to be filled. And now they found me. I wake sometimes to find dirt under my fingernails, though I have no memory of going outside. I discover symbols carved into my kitchen table, my bedroom walls, my own skin. Symbols I don't remember creating. Lucy calls occasionally. She's moved to Arizona. Not enough trees, she explains with a forced laugh. She doesn't remember much, but the dreams continue. The whispers are getting clearer, she told me last time. I think I'm starting to understand them. I didn't tell her I understand them too. Harold and Mabel send postcards from their travels, each one bearing a simple message beneath the cheerful vacation scenes. Stay in the light. But the darkness grows more inviting every day. I'm writing this as a warning, I suppose, a confession, a breadcrumb trail for whoever comes looking when I inevitably disappear. The watching woods are calling, and soon I won't be able to resist. If you're reading this and you visited Glacier National Park, or any ancient forest where the shadows seem too deep and the silence too complete, watch carefully. Listen closely. The watching woods may have marked you too. And if you hear humming in the night, a simple melody carried on the breeze, run. Run while you still can. Run before you start to hear the whispers. Run before you start to answer back. The summer of 2019 was supposed to be like any other. Instead, it became the season that would haunt my dreams for years to come. I was 15 when my parents decided I would benefit from a return to Whispering Pines Equestrian Camp, a place I had visited for the past 4 summers. Their reasoning was simple. I needed structure and fresh air, not endless days playing video games in our basement. You'll thank us later, Mom said as she packed my duffel bag, stuffing in the worn riding boots I'd outgrown emotionally if not physically. Besides, you've always loved Whispering Pines. She wasn't wrong. I had loved it. Past tense. But something about returning that year felt different. A reluctance I couldn't articulate settled into my bones as we drove down the winding road toward the camp entrance. The tall pines that gave the place its name seemed to bend toward our car, their shadows longer and darker than I remembered. Whispering Pines sat nestled in a valley, surrounded by dense forest and rolling hills about 3 hours from the nearest major city. The main lodge was a sprawling timber structure built in the 1950s, with smaller cabins scattered throughout the property. The horse stables were my favorite part. Clean, well-maintained barns that housed 30 horses of various breeds and temperaments. As our car pulled through the wooden archway marking the entrance, I noticed the camp sign had weathered considerably since last summer. The once bright paint was peeling, and one of the carved pine trees had split down the middle. Looks like they need to do some maintenance, Dad commented, eyeing the sign. The camp director, Mrs. Winters, greeted us with the same enthusiastic wave she'd given for years. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and despite her 60-something years, she moved with the energy of someone half her age. "Welcome back," she called, clipboard in hand. "We've got you in Pinecrest Cabin this year. You're one of our senior campers now, so you'll be helping with the younger ones occasionally." I nodded, trying to match her enthusiasm and failing miserably. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive, despite the clear blue sky overhead. As my parents drove away, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing except the gentle sway of pine needles in the afternoon breeze. Pinecrest Cabin was one of the older structures, positioned at the edge of the clearing, closer to the forest than I would have preferred. The wooden walls had darkened with age, and the roof was partially covered with a blue tarp where leaks had been hastily repaired. Inside, the floorboards creaked with every step, and the scent of mildew hung in the air despite the open windows. 3 cots lined each wall, though only 4 would be occupied according to the roster taped to the door. I claimed the bed farthest from the entrance, setting my duffel on the worn mattress. Within the hour, my cabin mates arrived. 2 younger girls, Bonnie and Cassidy, both around 11, claimed beds opposite mine, chattering excitedly about which horses they hoped to ride. The 4th camper was a quiet girl named Rita, closer to my age, who offered a small wave before settling onto the remaining bed. "Have you been here before?" Rita asked, carefully arranging her belongings in the small trunk beside her cot. 4 years, I replied. You? First time. She glanced toward the window, her expression unreadable. My parents thought it would be good for my anxiety, being around animals, nature, all that. Something in her tone made me pause. You don't seem convinced. Rita shrugged. I don't know. Something feels off about this place. Maybe it's just me. I wanted to tell her I felt it too. That strange sensation of wrongness that had settled over me the moment we'd arrived. But instead, I just nodded and continued unpacking. No point in scaring her on the first day. That night, during the welcome campfire, I found myself studying the other campers and counselors. There were about 50 of us in total, mostly girls between 10 and 16, with a handful of male campers among the older groups. The counselors were college-aged, enthusiastic, but clearly tired from preparation week. As Mrs. Winters went through the camp rules and schedule, I felt my attention drifting toward the darkness beyond our circle of light. The fire cast long shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources, stretching toward the woods like grasping fingers. For a moment, just a brief, terrifying moment, I thought I saw something move between the trees. A figure, unnaturally tall and thin, weaving between the pines. I blinked, and it was gone, leaving me to wonder if it had been there at all. Morning brought temporary relief from the uneasiness that had plagued me since arrival. Sunlight filtered through the cabin windows, casting warm patterns across the wooden floor. I had slept fitfully, waking several times to unfamiliar sounds, the rustling of leaves, distant snaps of twigs, and once, what sounded like scratching along the cabin wall. Breakfast was served in the main lodge, a chaotic affair of pancakes and excited chatter as campers discussed their activity preferences. I picked at my food, unable to shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach overnight. You're assigned to Snowfall, Mrs. Winters informed me as she handed out the horse assignments. She's new this year, but the staff thinks she'll be a good match for your experience level. I felt a twinge of disappointment. I'd hoped to be paired with Misty, the dapple gray mare I'd ridden the previous summer. What happened to Misty? Mrs. Winters' smile faltered slightly. She became difficult to handle this spring. We relocated her to a therapy program more suited to her needs. Something about her hesitation made me wonder if there was more to the story, but I didn't press further. The stables were a 10-minute walk from the main camp area, a sprawling wooden structure with 2 long rows of stalls. The familiar scents of hay, leather, and horses greeted me as I entered, bringing a momentary comfort that quickly dissipated when I reached Snowfall's stall. The white Arabian mare was beautiful, with delicate features and alert eyes. But unlike the other horses who were calmly eating or dozing in their stalls, Snowfall stood rigidly in the center of her space, ears pricked forward, muscles tensed as if ready to bolt. She's still adjusting, explained Reggie, the head wrangler, a man in his early 30s with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands. Gentle introduction is key. Just spend today getting to know each other. I nodded, carefully entering the stall with a curry comb in hand. Snowfall's eyes tracked my every movement, her nostrils flaring as she assessed me. Hey there, beautiful, I murmured, extending my hand slowly. We're going to be friends, okay? After several minutes, Snowfall allowed me to approach, tentatively accepting my touch. As I brushed her coat, I spoke softly, telling her about previous summers at camp, about school, about nothing in particular. The rhythm of grooming calmed both of us, and I began to think Mrs. Winters had made a good match after all. Until I heard it, a faint but distinct tapping sound coming from the barn wall behind us. Tap. 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 Snowfall heard it too. Her ears swiveled backward and tension returned to her body. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate, moving along the wall as if someone or something was walking the perimeter of the barn, dragging fingers along the wooden planks. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. Reggie? I called out, my voice embarrassingly unsteady. Is someone working on the barn? No answer came. I realized that while I'd been focused on grooming Snowfall, the other campers and staff had departed for a demonstration in the riding ring. We were alone. The tapping stopped directly behind Snowfall's stall, replaced by what sounded like soft, labored breathing. Snowfall's reaction was immediate and terrifying. She reared up, nearly striking me with her hooves, then backed against the far wall of the stall, eyes rolling to show the whites. I scrambled out of the stall, heart pounding as I secured the latch. The breathing sound ceased, followed by a heavy silence that seemed more threatening than any noise. Gathering my courage, I walked slowly around the exterior of the barn, expecting to find another camper playing a prank. There was no one there. No footprints in the soft dirt around the barn, no evidence that anyone had been circling the structure. Yet when I returned to Snowfall, she remained agitated, refusing to calm despite my best efforts. That night at dinner, I asked casually if anyone else had been at the stables during morning activities. Everyone was at the riding demonstration, Rita confirmed, picking at her mashed potatoes. Why? I hesitated, unwilling to sound foolish. No reason, just thought I heard someone. Rita studied me for a moment, then leaned closer. I heard something too last night, outside our cabin, like someone pacing back and forth. Probably a deer, offered Bonnie confidently. They come right up to the cabin sometimes. Maybe, Rita said, but her expression suggested she believed otherwise. That night, I lay awake long after the others had fallen asleep, listening to the sounds of the forest. The usual symphony of crickets and occasional hoots of owls should have been comforting, familiar. Instead, I found myself straining to hear anything abnormal, any indication that whatever had disturbed Snowfall was now prowling around our cabin. Just as exhaustion began to pull me towards sleep, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound just outside our window. Tap, tap, tap. Days at Whispering Pines followed a predictable pattern. Breakfast at 7:30, morning riding lessons until lunch, afternoon activities ranging from swimming to crafts, dinner at 6 o'clock, and evening programs until the 9:30 lights out. This structure should have been reassuring, but as the first week progressed, small disruptions began to accumulate like shadows lengthening at dusk. Snowfall remained skittish, though she gradually accepted me as her rider. During our third morning together, as I led her from the stall to the tacking area, she suddenly halted, refusing to move forward despite gentle encouragement. Come on, girl, I urged, tugging lightly on her lead rope. What's wrong? Her gaze was fixed on the dark corner of the barn where the tack room connected to the main structure. Though I saw nothing unusual, her fear was palpable, communicated through her trembling muscles and rapid breathing. After several minutes of coaxing, Snowfall finally moved forward, though she gave the corner a wide berth. As we passed, I felt a noticeable temperature drop, as if walking through a pocket of winter air despite the summer heat. Later that day, during the afternoon swim session at the small lake that bordered the western edge of camp, I overheard two counselors talking in hushed tones. Third time this week, one was saying, a tall woman named Irene who supervised the waterfront. Mrs. Winters says it's just vandals, but I don't know. The perimeter fence is intact, replied the other, a younger counselor whose name I couldn't recall. And those markings don't look like typical graffiti. They noticed me floating nearby and immediately changed the subject, switching to an overly cheerful discussion of the upcoming talent show. Their abrupt transition only heightened my curiosity and concern. That evening, I volunteered to help the kitchen staff with cleanup after dinner, hoping to glean more information from the adult conversations. As I stacked plates, the cook, a sturdy woman in her 50s everyone called Aunt Judy, was discussing maintenance issues with the groundskeeper. Another door found open this morning, the groundskeeper said, shaking his head. Storage shed near the north trail. I know I locked it yesterday. Animals can't work latches, Aunt Judy replied, lowering her voice. And those scratches on the inside. Kids playing pranks, he interrupted firmly, noticing me nearby. Nothing to worry about. But I had heard enough to add to my growing sense of unease. Something was happening at Whispering Pines, something the staff was trying to minimize or conceal from campers. That night, as we prepared for bed in our cabin, Cassidy complained about losing her favorite hair ribbon. I left it right on my trunk, she insisted, searching through her belongings for the third time. The blue one my grandmother gave me. Maybe it fell behind your bed? I suggested, helping her look. No, I've checked everywhere. Frustration colored her voice as she flopped onto her mattress. It's just gone. Small items had been disappearing throughout the camp. Hair accessories, a watch, a counselor's whistle, a pocket knife belonging to one of the male campers. Each instance was dismissed as carelessness or forgetfulness, but the pattern was becoming difficult to ignore. As the night deepened and my cabin mates fell asleep, I found myself once again listening to the sounds outside. The usual forest noises seemed muted, as if the wildlife was deliberately quieter than normal. In that unnatural silence, I thought I heard soft footsteps circling our cabin. Not the heavy tread of a human, but something lighter, almost delicate, like fingertips walking across the ground. I pulled my sleeping bag tighter around my shoulders, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination fueled by camp ghost stories and coincidences. But deep down, I knew something was watching our cabin, waiting for reasons I couldn't comprehend. The next morning, I woke before the others and stepped onto the cabin's small porch to watch the sunrise. The early light revealed something that sent ice through my veins. A neat arrangement of small objects placed on the bottom step. A blue hair ribbon, a silver whistle, a wristwatch with a cracked face, and other items I recognized as those reported missing. They were arranged in a perfect circle, like offerings at a shrine. I quickly gathered them up before the others could see, stuffing them into my pocket. Later, I discreetly returned each item to its owner, claiming I'd found them scattered near the main lodge. The relief on their faces was evident, but no one questioned how the items had ended up there, or why they'd been returned so mysteriously. No one except Rita, who cornered me after breakfast. "You didn't find those things by the lodge, did you?" Her voice was quiet, but insistent. I hesitated, then shook my head. "They were on our cabin steps this morning, arranged in a circle." Rita's face paled. "I saw something last night through the window. I thought I was dreaming, but..." She swallowed hard. "There was someone, or something, outside our cabin. It was tall, so tall and thin. It moved wrong, like its joints bent in places they shouldn't. The description matched the fleeting glimpse I'd caught at the campfire. Did you tell anyone? Who would believe me?" Rita looked around to ensure no one was listening. "But that's not all. When it was at our window, I heard it speaking. Not words exactly, more like whispers, like it was calling to us. A counselor called for us to join our activity groups, cutting our conversation short. As I headed toward the stables, Rita grabbed my arm. "Be careful," she warned. "I think it's getting bolder." A week into camp, the incidents had increased in both frequency and intensity. The atmosphere at Whispering Pines had shifted. Even the most oblivious campers seemed aware that something wasn't right. Counselors traveled in pairs, walkie-talkies constantly in hand. 2 additional security lights had been installed near the barn, their harsh glow cutting through the darkness, but somehow making the shadows beyond seem even darker. During Thursday's evening activity, a nature identification walk, our group discovered strange markings on several trees along the trail. Long, vertical scratches ran up the trunks, too high and too uniform to be from any local wildlife. "Mountain lion," declared our guide unconvincingly, hurrying us past. "Let's move along, everyone." I lingered, studying the marks. They weren't random animal claws, but deliberate patterns. 3 parallel lines repeated at consistent intervals up the trunk, as if something had been climbing. Or marking territory. That night I struggled to fall asleep despite the exhaustion weighing on my limbs. Rita's breathing was uneven in the bed beside mine. She was awake too, though we didn't speak. Across the room, Bonnie and Cassidy slept peacefully, their young faces relaxed in the dim glow of the night light we'd started keeping on. Just past midnight, according to the watch I now kept under my pillow, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps on our cabin porch. Not the random scurrying of an animal, but deliberate, measured steps. Tap, pause, tap, pause. The door handle turned slowly, metal scraping against metal. I had made sure to lock it before bed, an extra precaution I'd started taking without explaining to my cabin mates. The handle jiggled, testing the lock, then stopped. For a moment, silence resumed, and I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the sounds. Then came a new noise, soft scratching along the cabin wall, moving toward the window near my bed. Rita's sharp intake of breath told me she heard it too. The scratching circled the entire cabin, a methodical perimeter check. When it reached the window by my bed, it stopped. Against every instinct screaming for me to hide under the covers, I turned my head toward the glass. A face stared back at me. In the dim light, I could make out only the barest features, a gaunt, elongated face with hollow cheeks and deep-set eyes that reflected the nightlight with an unnatural gleam. It wasn't a mask or an animal, but something horrifyingly between, human enough to recognize as a face, but wrong in proportions and expression. I froze, unable to scream or move as those eyes locked with mine. The face remained motionless for several long seconds, then tilted in an unsettlingly fluid motion, as if studying me. A hand pressed against the glass, long, thin fingers with too many joints, nails that looked more like curved talons. "Do you see it?" Rita whispered, her voice barely audible. I couldn't respond, couldn't break the gaze of this creature. Its mouth opened slightly, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous and too sharp. The window began to rattle as the creature applied pressure, testing the strength of the glass. The old wooden frame creaked ominously, and I knew with terrible certainty that it wouldn't hold if the entity decided to force its way in. Just as the pressure increased to the point where I expected to hear breaking glass, a distant sound broke the standoff, the night security guard's ATV making its rounds. The creature's head snapped toward the noise, then back to me. Its mouth stretched into what might have been a smile but contained no warmth or humor, just a predatory promise of return. In a movement too quick to follow, it vanished from the window. No retreating footsteps, no rustling of underbrush, just sudden absence. Rita and I remained frozen for several minutes, neither of us willing to approach the window to confirm the creature was truly gone. Finally, I found my voice. "We need to tell someone." Rita nodded, her face pale in the dim light. "Who would believe us?" "Mrs. Winters, the security guard. Anyone." My voice shook with the remnants of terror. "That thing was trying to get in." "What was it?" Rita whispered. "It looked... God, I don't even know how to describe it." "It's been watching us," I said, pieces falling into place. "The missing items, the sounds at the barn, the scratches on the trees. It's been here the whole time, watching and... waiting. For what?" I had no answer, only the chilling certainty that we'd been marked in some way, selected for reasons beyond our understanding. We spent the remainder of the night huddled on Rita's bed, backs against the wall, taking turns keeping watch until dawn lightened the sky. Bonnie and Cassidy slept through it all, blissfully unaware of our night visitor. At breakfast, Rita and I must have looked as terrible as we felt. Dark circles shadowed our eyes, and we jumped at every unexpected noise. We debated how to approach Mrs. Winters with our experience, knowing how it would sound. Two teenage girls claiming to have seen a monster at their window. Our opportunity came when Mrs. Winters stopped by our table to check on the day's activities. "Mrs. Winters," I began, my voice lower than normal to avoid being overheard. "Something happened at our cabin last night. Something not normal." Her expression remained neutral, but I noticed her posture stiffen slightly. "What do you mean?" Rita jumped in, clearly deciding that directness was our best approach. "There was something at our window last night. Not a person, not exactly. It tried to get in." I expected dismissal, maybe even gentle mockery, but Mrs. Winters' reaction surprised me. She glanced quickly around the dining hall, then sat down at our table. "Tell me exactly what you saw," she said, her voice unnaturally even. "Every detail." We described the night visitor as accurately as we could. Its height, the wrong proportions of its face and hands, the way it moved. As we spoke, Mrs. Winters' complexion gradually paled, and I realized with growing horror that she believed us because she'd seen it too. "Has anyone else reported similar experiences?" I asked when we finished. She hesitated, clearly weighing her response. "There have been incidents over the years. Nothing confirmed." "This was real," Rita insisted. "It was at our window, trying to get in." Mrs. Winters nodded slowly. "I believe you. And I want you to know that we're taking additional security measures starting today. The camp perimeter will be checked hourly after dark, and we're bringing in extra staff for night patrols." Her words should have been reassuring, but the careful way she avoided directly acknowledging what we'd seen only deepened my unease. This wasn't a new development. This was something Whispering Pines had been dealing with for some time. "Is the camp in danger?" I asked bluntly. "No one has ever been harmed at Whispering Pines," she replied, which I noticed wasn't exactly an answer to my question. "Your safety is our primary concern. If you see or hear anything unusual again, use this." She handed us each a small whistle on a lanyard. "Security can hear these anywhere on camp property." As she walked away, Rita turned to me, her expression grim. "She knows something. This has happened before." I nodded, fingering the whistle. "And I don't think those extra security measures are going to help much. Whatever that thing is, it's not afraid of us." The following days passed in a blur of heightened vigilance. True to Mrs. Winters' word, security presence increased around camp. Additional floodlights were installed near the cabins, and counselors conducted more frequent bed checks. These measures provided little comfort, however. They seemed like flimsy defenses against what we had witnessed. Rumors spread through camp like wildfire, fueled by snippets of staff conversations and the visible increase in security. The younger campers created increasingly elaborate stories to explain the changes, ranging from escaped convicts to rabid bears. The older campers, more perceptive, recognized that something genuinely concerning was happening. Rita and I kept to ourselves, speaking in hushed tones when we were alone, comparing notes on unusual occurrences. We'd taken to sleeping in shifts, one keeping watch while the other rested. The constant vigilance was exhausting, but the alternative, being caught unaware if our visitor returned, was unthinkable. On the 5th night after our encounter, something changed in the atmosphere of the camp. The air felt thicker, charged with a strange electricity that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. Even the counselors seemed on edge, checking their walkie-talkies more frequently and hustling campers back to cabins immediately after the evening program. "Something's happening tonight," Rita whispered as we prepared for bed. "I can feel it." I nodded, unable to articulate the sense of foreboding that had settled in my chest. We should be ready. Bonnie and Cassidy picked up on our anxiety, asking questions we couldn't or wouldn't answer truthfully. "Why do you guys keep looking out the windows?" Cassidy asked, brushing her hair before bed. "Just checking the weather," I lied. "Looks like it might rain." "Are you scared of something?" Bonnie's direct question caught me off guard. Rita intervened smoothly. "We're just being cautious. You know, camp safety and all that." Eventually, the younger girls settled into their beds, falling asleep with the enviable ease of children who haven't yet learned to fear the darkness. Rita took the first watch as I tried to rest, though sleep remained elusive. Just after midnight, the electricity went out. The nightlight that had been our constant companion suddenly died, plunging the cabin into darkness broken only by moonlight filtering through the windows. Outside, the security floodlights had also failed, returning the camp to its natural nighttime state. "Power outage," Rita whispered, moving to sit beside me on my bed. "The storm must have—" "There is no storm," I interrupted, listening to the perfectly still night outside. No wind, no rain, no thunder, just absolute silence, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The walkie-talkie that Mrs. Winters had given us crackled to life, startling us both. "Attention all cabins," came a staticky voice, the head counselor trying to sound calm but failing to hide the tension underneath. "We're experiencing a camp-wide power outage. Please remain in your cabins. Counselors will be checking in shortly with flashlights. I repeat, remain in your cabins." "They cut the power," Rita said, her voice barely audible. "It wanted the lights out." The realization hit me with sickening certainty. This wasn't an accident or weather event. This was deliberate, a calculated move by something intelligent enough to understand our defenses and find a way to neutralize them. I grabbed the flashlight from under my pillow, relieved when it cast a beam of light across the cabin. The sudden illumination sent shadows dancing across the walls, momentarily mimicking movement where there was none. "Should we wake them?" Rita nodded toward Bonnie and Cassidy, still sleeping peacefully. "Not yet," I decided. "No point in scaring them if—" A soft tapping at the window cut me off mid-sentence. 3 slow, deliberate taps, followed by silence. Rita's hand found mine in the darkness, squeezing so tight it hurt. Neither of us moved toward the window. The tapping came again, this time at the door. Tap, tap, tap. "Hello?" called a voice from outside, unmistakably human, female, and frightened. "Is anyone awake? It's Irene, your counselor." We exchanged glances, momentarily relieved but still wary. "We're awake," I called back, moving cautiously toward the door. "Is everything okay?" "Power's out across camp," Irene replied. "I'm checking all the cabins in this area. Can you let me in?" Something in her tone didn't sound right. A slight strain, an unnatural cadence to the words. I hesitated, my hand on the door lock. "Mrs. Winters said we should stay inside with the doors locked," I replied, improvising. "She'll be making rounds with the master keys." A pause followed, too long to be natural. "There's been a change of plans." Irene's voice came again, flatter now. "I need you to open the door, right now." Rita shook her head violently, mouthing the word no. "We'll wait for Mrs. Winters," I insisted, backing away from the door. "Sorry, Irene." Another pause, then a sound that turned my blood to ice, a low, guttural growl that no human throat could produce. "Open the door." The voice was still recognizable as Irene's. but distorted now, as if something was forcing her vocal cords to form words they weren't designed to create. "Let me in." Bonnie stirred in her sleep, mumbling incoherently before settling again. Rita and I remained frozen, staring at the door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. "Let me in." The pretense of humanity was slipping from the voice with each repetition. "Let me in." The door handle began to turn, slowly testing the lock as it had nights before. When it found resistance, the pressure increased, metal groaning under strain. "The whistle," Rita hissed, fumbling for the lanyard Mrs. Winters had given us. Before she could raise it to her lips, a new sound filled the cabin. A static-laced transmission from the walkie-talkie. "Emergency protocol initiated," came Mrs. Winters' voice, tight with controlled fear. "All cabins, code red. Repeat, code red. Remain locked down until further notice. Security teams are—" The transmission cut off abruptly. Outside our door, the thing using Irene's voice went silent. The handle stopped turning. For a moment, I dared to hope it had given up. Then came a new sound. Fingernails dragging down the wooden door, slow and deliberate, leaving what I imagined were deep gouges in their wake. The sound continued around the perimeter of the cabin, a methodical circuit that ended at the window nearest my bed. I raised the flashlight, aiming the beam at the glass. For an instant, the light illuminated a face, not Irene's, but the elongated, hollow-eyed visage we'd seen before. Its eyes reflected the flashlight beam like an animal's, glowing with an unnatural yellow sheen. Then the window exploded inward. Glass shattered across the floor as a long, thin arm snaked through the opening, too long for human proportions, joints bending in impossible ways. Taloned fingers grasped at the air, searching for something to grab. Bonnie and Cassidy woke with terrified screams. Rita blew her whistle with desperate force, the shrill sound piercing through the night. I acted on pure instinct, grabbing the heavy metal flashlight and bringing it down with all my strength on the grotesque limb. A howl of pain echoed through the cabin as the arm withdrew, taking chunks of broken glass with it. "Under the beds!" I shouted to Bonnie and Cassidy, who scrambled to obey, their faces white with terror. Rita continued blowing the whistle as I fumbled with the walkie-talkie, pressing the emergency transmission button. "It's breaking in!" I shouted into the device. "Pinecrest cabin! It's breaking in!" Static answered me, broken by fragments of voices too distorted to understand. Outside, something large moved around the cabin, its footsteps heavy now, abandoning stealth for raw aggression. The door shuddered under a powerful impact, the wood splintering around the lock. Another blow, and the frame began to crack. "What do we do?" Rita's voice was barely audible over the pounding. I looked around desperately for anything we could use as a weapon or barricade. My gaze fell on the small propane heater in the corner, the emergency heating system for when temperatures dropped unexpectedly. "The propane," I whispered, a terrible plan forming. "If it breaks in—" Rita's eyes widened as she understood my half-formed thought. "That's insane." "You have a better idea?" I asked as the door splintered further, a long, taloned hand visible through the widening crack. She shook her head, then moved quickly to the heater, turning the valve to release the gas. The distinctive odor filled the cabin almost immediately. "Bonnie, Cassidy," I called to the terrified girls under the beds. "When I say now, run for the back window, the small one in the bathroom. Go through it and don't stop running until you reach the main lodge." The pounding at the door reached a crescendo, wood giving way as something forced its way inside. Through the growing opening, I caught glimpses of a nightmare made flesh, a towering, emaciated figure with limbs too long and joints too numerous, its skin a sickly grayish white that had never seen sunlight. "Now!" I screamed, grabbing the flashlight and smashing it against the propane heater's exposed elements. Sparks flew as Bonnie and Cassidy scrambled toward the bathroom, Rita right behind them. I backed toward the bathroom door as the creature forced its way into the cabin, its full height forcing it to bend unnaturally beneath the ceiling. Its face, if it could be called that, was a hollow-cheeked approximation of human features, with eyes like black pits and a mouth stretched too wide across its lower face. For one terrible moment, our gazes locked. Intelligence burned in those inhuman eyes, not animal cunning, but something older, colder, infinitely patient. It recognized me from our previous encounters, and I knew with sickening certainty that it had chosen me specifically, though I couldn't comprehend why. Its mouth opened to reveal rows of needle-like teeth as it reached for me with those grotesquely elongated arms. The propane ignited. A whoosh of flame erupted from the heater, spreading rapidly through the gas-filled air, The creature shrieked, a sound so high-pitched and alien it threatened to shatter my eardrums. I stumbled backward through the bathroom door, slamming it shut as flames engulfed the main room. Rita had already helped Bonnie and Cassidy through the small window. She was halfway out herself, turning back with panic in her eyes. "Come on!" I scrambled toward the window, the heat of the fire already seeping through the bathroom door. Outside, I could hear the creature's inhuman screams mixing with human shouts as camp staff responded to the commotion. The window was barely large enough for me to squeeze through, glass cutting into my palms as I hauled myself out. As my feet cleared the sill, a taloned hand punched through the bathroom door, flailing blindly as flames licked at the splintered wood. We ran without looking back, the orange glow of the burning cabin lighting our way through the darkness. Behind us, inhuman screams gradually faded, replaced by the shouts of adults and the wail of distant sirens. The following hours passed in a blur of emergency vehicles, flashing lights, and concerned adults asking the same questions repeatedly. Firefighters controlled the blaze before it could spread to nearby cabins or the surrounding forest. But Pinecrest was a total loss. Nothing but charred timber and ash remained by dawn. We were separated for questioning. Standard procedure, we were told, for any serious incident. I sat wrapped in a scratchy emergency blanket in Mrs. Winter's office as a police officer asked me to explain what had happened. I told the truth, or a version of it. A power outage, someone trying to break in. The propane heater accidentally knocked over in our panic. I said nothing about elongated limbs or inhuman faces, nothing about the weeks of strange occurrences leading up to that night. The disbelief in the officer's eyes, even at my sanitized account, told me that the full truth would never be accepted. Rita, I later learned, had given a similar story. Bonnie and Cassidy, too traumatized to be questioned extensively, were quickly collected by their parents, who arrived in the early morning hours looking pale and terrified. By mid-morning, the official narrative had been established. A failed break-in attempt by vandals who had been responsible for earlier disturbances at the camp, followed by an accidental fire when the panicked campers tried to escape. The power outage was attributed to a blown transformer, though no explanation was given for why the backup generators had also failed. Mrs. Winters found me sitting alone on a bench outside the main lodge, watching as parents arrived to collect their children. Camp had been officially canceled for the remainder of the session. "Your parents will be here in about an hour," she said, sitting beside me. They were very worried. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The events of the night had left me hollow, exhausted beyond words. "What you did was very brave," she continued after a moment of silence. "You saved those girls." "What was it?" I asked, my voice rough from smoke inhalation and screaming. "You know, don't you?" Mrs. Winters stared at the distant tree line, her face unreadable. "Whispering Pines has stood for over 70 years, she said finally. In all that time, there have been incidents. Things we can't explain. Things we don't discuss. That doesn't answer my question." She sighed, suddenly looking much older than her years. "The locals, the ones whose families have been in these mountains for generations, they have stories, legends about something that lives in these woods, something that watches, waits, takes an interest in certain people." She glanced at me meaningfully. "Especially young people with sensitivity to their surroundings." "Like me," I whispered, remembering how I'd felt unsettled from the moment we arrived, how Snowfall had responded to me, how the entity had singled out our cabin. "Like you," she confirmed. "In all my years running this camp, it's never been this bold, this aggressive. We've had sightings, minor incidents, but nothing like this." Did it die in the fire?" Mrs. Winters' expression darkened. "I doubt it. Things like that don't die easily, if at all." "Things like what?" She stood, adjusting her camp director badge. "Some questions are better left unanswered. You're safe now. That's what matters." As she walked away, I called after her, "Will you reopen the camp?" She paused, looking back over her shoulder. "Not this summer. Beyond that, we'll see." My parents arrived exactly when Mrs. Winters had predicted, their faces tight with worry as they embraced me. They asked the same questions the police had, and I gave them the same sanitized version of events. They didn't need to know about the thing in the woods. No one did, except those who had already encountered it. As we drove away from Whispering Pines, I watched the camp recede in the rearview mirror. The pine trees seemed to bend inward, creating a shadowy tunnel that swallowed the road behind us. For an instant, I thought I saw movement among the trunks. Something tall and thin, moving with unnatural grace between the shadows. Then we rounded a bend, and the camp disappeared from view. 3 days after returning home, the nightmares began. They always started the same way. I was back at Whispering Pines, alone in Pinecrest Cabin. Outside, a gentle tapping would begin, first at the windows, then the walls, then the door. Tap, tap, tap. No matter how I tried to ignore it, the sound would continue, growing more insistent until I was forced to acknowledge it. In the dream, I would approach the door, knowing what waited on the other side, but unable to stop myself from reaching for the handle. As the door swung open, those hollow eyes would meet mine, that too wide mouth stretching into a grotesque parody of a smile. Long, taloned fingers would reach for me. I would wake gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, the phantom sensation of cold fingers brushing my face lingering in the darkness of my bedroom. My parents attributed my disturbed sleep to trauma from the fire, suggesting therapy to help process the experience. I agreed, not because I believed it would help, but because I needed someone to talk to who was bound by confidentiality. Dr. Mercer was in her 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that I appreciated. During our first session, I told her the official version of events, testing her reactions, gauging whether she might be receptive to the truth. "You seem to be holding something back," she observed after I finished my sanitized account. "Something you're afraid to share." The perceptiveness of her comment caught me off guard. "Would you believe me if I told you what really happened?" "Try me," she replied simply. So I did. I told her everything. The weeks of strange occurrences, the entity at the window, its unnatural appearance and behavior, the deliberate power outage, the final confrontation. I described its elongated limbs and hollow face, the intelligence in its eyes, the way it had systematically targeted our cabin. Throughout my account, Dr. Mercer remained silent, her expression neutral. When I finished, she didn't immediately speak, instead writing something in her notepad. "You think I'm making this up?" I said, disappointment creeping into my voice. "No," she replied, surprising me. "I think you genuinely believe what you're telling me. But you don't believe it's real." Dr. Mercer set her notepad aside. "What I believe isn't important. What matters is understanding why you experience things this way." It was the response I should have expected, yet it still stung. Even in this safe space, the truth was too bizarre to be accepted at face value. "Have you spoken with any of the other girls since returning home?" she asked, changing the subject slightly. I shook my head. "Their parents probably wouldn't want them talking to me. I'm the one who set the cabin on fire, remember?" "You saved their lives," Dr. Mercer corrected gently. "Perhaps connecting with them would help all of you process what happened." The suggestion lingered in my mind after the session ended. That evening, I gathered my courage and called Rita's home number, which I'd gotten from the camp directory before leaving. Her mother answered, her tone immediately cooling when I introduced myself. "Rita's been through quite enough," she said tersely. "I don't think speaking with you would be helpful right now." "Please," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "I just need to know if she's okay, if she's been having nightmares too." A long pause followed, then the sound of the phone changing hands. "Hello?" Rita's voice was thin, strained, but unmistakably hers. Relief flooded through me. "Rita, it's me. Are you okay?" "Define okay," she replied with a weak attempt at humor. "I'm not sleeping much. You?" "Nightmares," I admitted. "Every night." "Me too. Same dream?" "Opening the door and seeing it there?" "Yeah." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But that's not the worst part. Sometimes, when I'm awake, I think I see it. Just glimpses, through windows, in mirrors, at the edge of my vision. Like it followed me home." A chill ran down my spine. I'd had the same experiences. Fleeting shadows and reflective surfaces, the sensation of being watched. Moments when the air would suddenly grow cold for no apparent reason. "Have you told anyone?" I asked. "Who would believe me? They all think we're traumatized from the break-in and fire. My parents have me seeing a therapist 3 times a week. Mine too, 1 session so far." "Does it help?" The hope in her voice was painful to hear. "Not really," I admitted. "They can't help with something they don't believe is real." We talked for nearly an hour, comparing experiences, finding comfort in shared understanding. Before hanging up, Rita asked the question that had been haunting me since that night. Do you think it's really gone? Or is it still out there watching us? I hesitated, remembering Mrs. Winter's words. I don't think it's gone. I think it's waiting. For what? I don't know, I replied honestly. But we survived once. We can do it again if we have to. After hanging up, I sat at my desk, staring at my reflection in the darkened computer screen. For an instant, I thought I saw something move behind me. A tall, thin shadow with too many joints. I spun around, heart racing, but found only my empty bedroom. That night, I left the lights on while I slept, a childish defense against the darkness, but one that brought small comfort. The nightmares came anyway. But this time, something was different. As the entity reached for me with those impossibly long fingers, I found myself standing my ground instead of cowering in fear. What do you want? I demanded in the dream. Its mouth opened wider than any human mouth could stretch, but no sound emerged. Instead, I felt its answer in my mind. Not words exactly, but impressions, emotions, ancient hunger. It wanted me. Not my body or my life, but something deeper. My fear, my awareness, my recognition of its existence. It had been watching, waiting, selecting those who could truly see it, truly fear it. I woke with a startling revelation. Its power came from our fear. The more terrified we were, the stronger its hold became. Rita and I had been ideal targets, sensitive to our surroundings, quick to notice the abnormal, prone to the very fear it craved. The next morning, I called Rita again, eager to share my insight. But the person who answered wasn't Rita or her mother. Hello? A man's voice, professional and detached. I'm calling for Rita, I said, confused. Is this the right number? A pause. This is Detective Morris with the County Police Department. May I ask who's calling? My blood ran cold. Is Rita okay? What happened? Another pause, longer this time. I'm afraid there was an incident last night. Rita is in the hospital. Who am I speaking with? I identified myself, then pressed for details. The detective was reluctant at first, but eventually shared the bare facts. Rita had been found unconscious in her bathroom, an apparent suicide attempt. She had left a note claiming it wouldn't leave her alone. Did she describe what it was? I asked, my voice shaking. That's not something I can discuss, the detective replied. But I'd like to speak with you in person. Rita mentioned your name in her note. We arranged to meet that afternoon at the local police station. My parents were concerned but supportive, assuming Rita's hospitalization was related to trauma from the fire. Detective Morris was in his 40s, with tired eyes and the demeanor of someone who had seen too much. He led me to a small interview room, assuring my waiting parents that this was just a routine conversation. Rita's going to be okay, physically, he began once we were seated, but she's been placed on a 72-hour psychiatric hold for evaluation. She's not crazy, I said immediately. Whatever she told you, whatever was in that note, it's real. The detective studied me carefully. She described a creature stalking her, something inhuman that followed her home from camp. She said you would confirm her story. I hesitated, weighing my options. If I told the truth, I risked being dismissed as another traumatized teenager. If I lied, I betrayed Rita and denied what I knew to be real. I saw it too, I said finally. At camp, and since coming home. Detective Morris didn't react with the skepticism I expected. Instead, he opened a folder on the table between us, removing several photographs. These were taken at Whispering Pines after the fire, he explained, sliding them toward me. Standard procedure for documenting the scene. The photos showed the charred remains of Pinecrest Cabin, the blackened timber and melted metal of what had once been our temporary home. Nothing unusual, until I noticed what the detective was pointing to in one image. In the ash and debris near what had been the cabin door, clearly visible despite the destruction, was a set of footprints. Not human footprints. They were too long, too narrow, with distinct impressions that looked like elongated toes ending in points. The forensics team can't identify these, Detective Morris said quietly. They don't match any known animal or human pattern. I stared at the photo, a mixture of vindication and renewed terror washing over me. It was there, just like we said. The detective collected the photos, returning them to his folder. There's something else. This isn't the first incident connected to that camp. There have been others over the years, campers reporting strange sightings, unexplained occurrences. Most were dismissed as pranks or overactive imaginations. But now, you believe us, I said, hardly daring to hope. Let's say I'm keeping an open mind. He handed me his card. If you experience anything unusual, anything at all, call me directly, day or night. As I stood to leave, a thought occurred to me. Detective? What's going to happen to Rita? His expression softened slightly. That depends on the psychiatric evaluation. But given the physical evidence we've found, I'll be advocating for her release. In the meantime, be careful. If whatever you both saw is real, it's real, I assured him. And it's not finished with us. 2 weeks passed. Rita was released from psychiatric hold after 4 days, largely thanks to Detective Morris's intervention. We spoke daily, comparing notes on our experiences, supporting each other through nightmares and moments of panic. The sightings continued, glimpses of something tall and thin at the edges of our vision, reflections that moved independently, the sensation of being watched when we were alone. But as we shared these experiences, cataloging them, analyzing them, something began to change. The fear that had once paralyzed us gradually transformed into something else, determination, even anger. It feeds on fear, I explained to Rita during one of our calls. The more afraid we are, the stronger its connection to us becomes. So what do? Just stop being afraid? Easier said than done. Not stop being afraid, I clarified. Accept the fear, but don't let it control us, like exposure therapy. We developed strategies for confronting our fears, sleeping with lights on initially, then gradually reducing the illumination. Deliberately looking at reflective surfaces rather than avoiding them. Speaking aloud when we sensed a presence, acknowledging it without cowering from it. Detective Morris became an unexpected ally, checking in regularly and sharing information from his ongoing investigation into Whispering Pines. The camp remained closed for renovations, though rumors suggested it might never reopen. Exactly 1 month after our escape from Pinecrest Cabin, the nightmares reached their peak. In my dream, I found myself back at camp, standing alone in the burned shell of our cabin. The entity emerged from the charred remains, its elongated form unfolding like some grotesque origami creation, those hollow eyes fixed on mine. But this time, instead of running, I stood my ground. I'm not afraid of you anymore, I declared, the words feeling true even as I spoke them. The creature tilted its head, studying me with those empty eyes. Its mouth opened in that too wide grimace, but instead of lunging for me, it began to fade. Like a photograph left in sunlight, its edges blurred, its form becoming transparent. I woke with a gasp, but not from terror, from a profound sense of release. The oppressive presence that had haunted my room for weeks was gone, leaving only ordinary darkness. I called Rita immediately, despite the early hour. She answered on the first ring. It's gone, she said without preamble. I can feel it. It's not watching anymore. I know, I replied, relief washing over me. I think we did it. We broke its hold. The change was gradual, but unmistakable. The sightings stopped. The nightmares faded. The constant sensation of being observed disappeared. By the time school started in September, we had begun to heal, though neither of us would ever be quite the same. Detective Morris called occasionally, updating us on his investigation. Whispering Pines remained closed indefinitely. Mrs. Winters had retired suddenly, moving to Arizona without leaving a forwarding address. Most significantly, Morris had uncovered records of similar incidents dating back to the camp's founding in the 1950s. Periodic cycles of strange occurrences, always centered around certain campers who seemed to attract the entity's attention. Whatever it was, he told me during our final conversation, it's been there a long time, and you two are the first to drive it away, as far as I can tell. We didn't drive it away, I corrected him. We just stopped giving it what it wanted. I've never returned to Whispering Pines. According to local news reports, the property was sold to developers the following year, the buildings demolished to make way for luxury vacation homes. I wonder sometimes if the new residents experience anything unusual. Unexplained sounds in the night, the sensation of being watched, glimpses of something tall and thin moving between the trees. Rita and I still talk occasionally, though less frequently as the years pass and life pulls us in different directions. We never speak of that summer to anyone else. Who would believe us? Even with Detective Morris's evidence, our experience remains firmly in the realm of the unexplainable. But sometimes, when I find myself alone in unfamiliar woods, I feel a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I don't run, and I don't cower. Instead, I turn and face the shadows directly, acknowledging the fear without surrendering to it. After all, there are things in this world that exist in the spaces between what we know and what we fear. Things that gain power from our terror and fade when confronted with courage. I learned that lesson at Whispering Pines, in a summer that taught me the true nature of fear and the strength that comes from facing it. Some nights, I still dream of those hollow eyes and that too wide smile. But in my dreams now, I'm the one who turns away first, denying it the fear it craves, leaving it to fade back into the darkness where it belongs. I've never been one to believe in superstitions. Friday the 13th was just another day on the calendar to me, until 3 years ago when everything changed. It began with a simple text message from my friend Jared, suggesting a weekend camping trip to Snively Hot Springs in eastern Oregon. The date happened to fall on Friday the 13th, which several friends pointed out with theatrical warnings and jokes about horror movies. "Anyone up for Snively this weekend?" Jared's message read in our group chat. "Weather forecast looks perfect, and the hot springs will be amazing at night." I had a shift at the warehouse on Saturday morning, but the idea of escaping the city's confines for even one night was too tempting to resist. A quick mental calculation told me I could make it work if I limited my drinking and left early the next morning. "I'm in," I replied, "but I'll need to head back early Saturday for work." Within hours, our group had swelled to 11 people. Myself, Jared, his girlfriend Maya, our mutual friends Wesley, Bennett, Isabella, Ruby, Kai, Zoe, Vincent, and Isabella's border collie, Scout. Most of us had known each other since college, bonded by our shared love for outdoor adventures. As we finalized plans throughout the week, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Perhaps it was Jared mentioning that the full moon would coincide with our trip, or the weather report warning of unusually cold temperatures for April, or simply the accumulation of small coincidences. My rational mind dismissed these thoughts as meaningless pattern-seeking, yet something felt off. The night before our departure, I packed with unusual care. Extra layers, a high-powered flashlight, a fully charged power bank, and a comprehensive first aid kit. My roommate noticed my methodical preparation. "Planning for the apocalypse?" he joked, watching me organize my backpack. "Just being prepared," I replied. "We'll be pretty far from civilization." I didn't tell him about the strange dreams I'd been having all week. Dreams of being pursued through dark woods by something I couldn't see but could hear breathing behind me. Dreams where I ran until my lungs burned but could never quite escape. We departed Portland just after noon on Friday, split between 3 vehicles. I rode with Jared, Maya, and Wesley in Jared's SUV, while the others followed in Bennett's truck and Vincent's compact car. The drive east took us through the Columbia River Gorge, where basalt cliffs towered over the highway and the river stretched blue and vast to our right. As we crossed into eastern Oregon, the landscape transformed dramatically. Lush forests gave way to high desert, a sparse, open terrain of sagebrush and juniper trees beneath an endless sky. The emptiness intensified as we turned onto progressively smaller roads, the pavement eventually yielding to gravel that crunched beneath our tires and sent dust billowing behind us. "How much farther?" Wesley asked from the back seat, where he'd been scrolling through his phone. "About 20 minutes, Jared replied, squinting at the setting sun. "We should get there just before dark if we don't hit any problems." The timing was perfect, or would have been if not for the flat tire that forced us to stop 10 miles from our destination. While Jared and I worked to change it, Maya pointed out something concerning. "Look at those clouds moving in," she said, gesturing toward the western horizon where dark clouds had begun to gather. "That wasn't in the forecast." Wesley checked his weather app, frowning. "Still says clear all weekend. Must be a localized system." The delay cost us the remaining daylight. By the time we arrived at Snively Hot Springs, darkness had fallen completely. The moon, nearly full but not quite, hung low in the eastern sky, casting enough light to outline the surrounding hills but leaving the details in shadow. The other cars had arrived before us. Bennett had already started setting up the communal area where we'd be cooking and gathering around the fire. I could hear laughter and the sound of tent poles clicking together as we pulled in. "You guys made it," Isabella called, Scout barking excitedly beside her. We were starting to get worried. "Flat tire," I explained, unloading my gear. Not the best start to a Friday the 13th camping trip. "Don't even joke about that," Ruby said, her face illuminated by the beam of her headlamp. "I'm already jumpy enough out here." We worked quickly to set up our tents in a rough semicircle around what would become our fire pit. The night air had grown unexpectedly cold, and the promise of warming ourselves by a fire spurred our efforts. In the distance, I could hear the soft bubbling of the hot springs, barely audible over the rustle of wind through the sagebrush. As I hammered the last stake into the hard ground, I paused, certain I'd heard something moving in the darkness beyond our campsite. I directed my headlamp toward the sound, but saw nothing except the swaying branches of a juniper tree. Probably just an animal, I told myself, though I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. With camp established, we gathered around the fire that Bennett and Kai had built. The flames pushed back the darkness, creating a circle of warmth and light that felt like a fortress against the vast, unseen wilderness beyond. Vincent unpacked a cooler filled with beer and handed them around. True to my plan, I accepted one but resolved to stop there. Tomorrow's early shift loomed in my mind. To surviving Friday the 13th, Zoe joked, raising her can in a mock toast. And to hot springs under a full moon, Jared added. Actually, Maya corrected. Full moon isn't until tomorrow night. Tonight it's just shy of full. Close enough, Wesley said, already opening his second beer. Either way, we've got perfect timing. The conversation flowed easily as it always did with this group. We discussed work, relationships, future plans, the usual topics among friends in their late 20s navigating the complexities of adult life. As the night progressed, I noticed Kai and Wesley exchanging glances before Kai subtly passed something to Wesley beneath the firelight's glow. An hour later, Wesley approached me at the edge of our circle where I'd moved to grab another layer from my tent. The temperature had dropped further, and my breath formed visible clouds in the air. Want to enhance the experience a bit? He asked quietly, showing me a small plastic bag containing what looked like dried mushroom pieces. Just a microdose, nothing too intense. Perfect for the hot springs later? I hesitated. Psychedelics weren't new to me, but I generally avoided them in unfamiliar settings. Still, the amount he offered was minimal, just enough to heighten perception without inducing hallucinations. Just a small amount, I agreed, accepting a tiny piece. I still need to drive tomorrow. Several others in our group had made the same choice, I soon realized. By the time we decided to visit the hot springs around 10 o'clock, a subtle shift in perception had begun. Colors from the fire seemed more vibrant, sounds slightly clearer, and the stars overhead impossibly bright against the black canvas of night. The hot springs were a short walk from our campsite, down a narrow trail that descended toward the river. Steam rose from the series of natural pools, creating ghostly shapes that danced in the moonlight. We changed into swimwear and slipped into the warm water, sighing collectively as the heat enveloped our bodies. "This is perfect," Isabella murmured, Scout waiting patiently at the edge of the springs. I leaned back against the smooth rock edge, gazing up at the stars and the near full moon. The mild effects of the mushrooms enhanced the beauty of the moment. The contrast between the hot water and cold air, the distant hooting of an owl, the rippling patterns of moonlight on the water's surface. Yet even in this moment of tranquility, something felt wrong. Twice I caught myself scanning the darkness beyond our pools, certain I'd seen movement in the periphery of my vision. Scout seemed to sense it too, occasionally rising to attention, ears perked forward, staring into the blackness before settling back down. After about an hour, Jared suggested something that would change everything. "We should take advantage of this moonlight and go for a night walk," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. "The view from the ridge above camp is incredible." Most of our friends declined, preferring to return to the warmth of the fire, but I found myself nodding along with Maya and Wesley, the subtle influence of the mushrooms making the idea seem especially appealing. Scout would join us too, Isabella said, as the dog could use the exercise. None of us could have predicted what awaited us on that ridge. We dried off and changed back into our clothes, grabbing our flashlights before setting off. The microdose had reached its peak, not enough to distort reality, but sufficient to heighten my senses and create a heightened awareness of our surroundings. The night air felt electric against my skin as we began walking uphill from our camp, away from the safety of the fire and the others. Wesley led our small group, his powerful flashlight carving a tunnel of light through the darkness. Maya followed, with Scout trotting alongside her, and I brought up the rear. Our breath formed clouds of vapor that caught the light of our beams before dissipating into the cold night. "The trail should be just ahead," Wesley said, directing his light toward a gap in the sagebrush. "It winds up to a viewpoint where you can see the whole valley." The path narrowed as we ascended, forcing us to walk single file. Juniper trees loomed on either side, their gnarled branches reaching like arthritic fingers across our path. In the moonlight, every shadow seemed to move, and the subtle effects of the mushrooms didn't help. I found myself constantly turning to check behind us, unable to shake the feeling that we were being followed. "You okay back there?" Maya called over her shoulder, noticing my frequent glances behind us. "Yeah," I replied, not wanting to spread my unease, just taking in the surroundings. We had been walking for about 10 minutes when Scout suddenly froze, her body becoming rigid. Her ears flattened against her head, and a low growl rumbled in her throat. "What's wrong, girl?" Maya asked, kneeling beside the dog. Wesley directed his flashlight in the direction Scout was staring, but the beam revealed nothing except more juniper and sagebrush. The dog's behavior had unsettled all of us, though. We stood in silence, straining to hear whatever had alarmed her. That's when I heard it. A soft, crunching sound, like something moving carefully through the underbrush to our right. Scout's growl intensified. "Probably just a deer," Wesley suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. We continued walking, but the carefree mood had evaporated. Scout stayed close to Maya now, no longer ranging ahead to explore. The trail turned sharply to the right, leading us deeper into a section where the junipers grew thicker, blocking much of the moonlight. "The viewpoint should be just ahead," Wesley said, his voice hushed as if he feared being overheard. The sound came again, brush moving, but with a deliberate quality that seemed distinctly unlike a deer. This time it was closer, and immediately to our left. Wesley swung his flashlight toward the sound. Two glowing eyes reflected the light, floating like eerie lanterns about 3 feet off the ground. "Don't move," Wesley whispered, his voice barely audible. The beam of his flashlight illuminated what we were facing, a full-grown mountain lion, its tawny coat blending perfectly with the surrounding landscape. It was massive, easily 150 pounds, with muscles rippling beneath its fur as it regarded us with predatory intensity. The distance between us couldn't have been more than 15 feet. My heart hammered against my ribcage with such force I was certain the others could hear it. The mild alteration to my perception from the mushrooms made the moment surreal. The mountain lion appeared simultaneously more detailed and more threatening, its whiskers, teeth, and the texture of its fur standing out with unnatural clarity. We began backing away slowly, remembering the conventional wisdom about large predators. Don't run, don't turn your back. Scout, displaying either remarkable training or terror-induced compliance, stayed perfectly still beside Maya, though a continuous low growl emanated from her throat. "Keep moving back," Wesley breathed, slow and steady. The mountain lion didn't advance, but its gaze remained fixed on us, tail twitching slightly. I'd never felt so exposed, so intensely aware of my vulnerability. Humans aren't designed to be prey, but in that moment, I understood with perfect clarity what it meant to be hunted. As we retreated, step by agonizing step, Scout suddenly bolted to our right, disappearing into the underbrush with a panicked yelp. The mountain lion's gaze flicked toward the movement, but, to our surprise, it didn't give chase. Instead, those gleaming eyes returned to fix on us. "Scout!" Maya called in a harsh whisper, fear evident in her voice. "Don't!" Wesley warned. "We can't split up." We continued our backward retreat until we reached a small clearing where the trail widened slightly. My back bumped against something solid, a fence marking the boundary of someone else's campsite. We'd backed up along the trail much farther than I'd realized. That's when we heard it. Rapid movement through the underbrush behind us. Scout emerged from the darkness, racing toward us with her tail tucked between her legs. But the sound of movement didn't stop with her arrival. Something else was approaching from behind. Wesley swung his flashlight around, illuminating the source. A second mountain lion, smaller than the first, but no less terrifying. A juvenile, perhaps, but still easily capable of killing an adult human. "It's between us and camp," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. The realization struck us simultaneously. We were trapped between two predators, with only a fence at our backs. The situation had deteriorated from concerning to potentially fatal in seconds. Mountain lion attacks on humans are rare, but when they occur, they're often deadly. Now we face two of them, cut off from the safety of our camp, with only a wire fence separating us from an unknown campsite behind us. "The fence," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "We need to get over it, now." Scout sensed our intent and squeezed through a gap at the bottom of the fence. The rest of us weren't so lucky. The fence stood about 5 feet high, topped with barbed wire, a standard cattle fence used throughout rural Oregon. Maya went first, Wesley boosting her up. Her jacket caught on the barbs, tearing audibly as she freed herself and dropped to the other side. As Wesley prepared to climb, the larger mountain lion took a step forward, muscles tensing in what looked like preparation to charge. My blood seemed to freeze in my veins. "Go!" I hissed at Wesley. "Now!" He scrambled up the fence with surprising agility, considering the circumstances. The barbed wire caught his pant leg, slicing through both fabric and skin. He grunted in pain but pushed through, tumbling to the other side where Maya caught him before he could hit the ground. Now I was alone, facing 2 mountain lions with only a failing flashlight between us. The battery was dying, the beam growing noticeably dimmer. I backed against the fence, feeling the cold metal press against my back. "Come on!" Maya urged from the other side. I gripped the wire, feeling it bite into my palms as I pulled myself up. The smaller mountain lion darted forward suddenly, covering half the distance between us in a single bound. Terror gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. I hauled myself upward, ignoring the barbs that tore at my clothing and skin. As I swung my leg over the top, I felt a sharp pain across my calf, barbed wire cutting through my jeans and into flesh. I didn't stop, dropping to the other side and landing hard on my shoulder. Wesley and Maya pulled me to my feet immediately, and we stumbled backward, putting distance between ourselves and the fence. Looking back, I saw both mountain lions pacing on the other side, their eyes still reflecting what little light remained from our flashlights. They made no attempt to follow us over the fence, a small mercy in an otherwise nightmarish situation. We had escaped immediate danger, but our problems were far from over. We found ourselves in a stranger's campsite, bleeding from multiple cuts, with no clear path back to our own camp, except through mountain lion territory. "Where are we?" Maya whispered, scanning our surroundings. The campsite appeared deserted. A large tent stood about 20 yards away, and beside it, a parked SUV. A cold fire pit suggested the occupants had either gone to sleep or were away from their camp. "Hello?" Wesley called out, his voice carefully modulated to be loud enough to alert anyone nearby without carrying back to the mountain lions. "Is anyone here? We need help!" No response came from the tent or anywhere else in the campsite. The silence felt wrong somehow, oppressive and unnatural. Even the usual night sounds, insects, wind in the trees, seemed to have ceased. "Let's try the car," I suggested. "If we can sound the horn, it might scare off the mountain lions and alert our friends." We approached the SUV cautiously, Scout staying close to Maya's heels. The vehicle was unlocked, not unusual in such a remote location where crime was virtually non-existent. Wesley slid into the driver's seat and located the horn, pressing it in a series of long blasts that shattered the night's silence. "We're not thieves," Maya shouted between horn blasts. "There are mountain lions nearby. We're just trying to get back to our camp." We waited, expecting the occupants of the tent to emerge, likely angry at being awakened, but present nonetheless. The tent remained still and silent. "Something's wrong," I said, voicing what we all felt. Someone should have come out by now. Maya's face had gone pale in the moonlight. "I think I heard something," she whispered, "from inside the tent. Like someone trying to scream, but they can't." Wesley and I exchanged glances, neither wanting to acknowledge the implication of Maya's words. Scout whined softly, pressing against Maya's leg. "We need to check," Wesley finally said. "If someone's hurt in there. Or we need to find another way back to camp," I countered, the logical part of my brain fighting against the creeping dread. "Our friends will be wondering where we are." Maya shook her head. "If someone's in trouble, we can't just leave." The decision made, we approached the tent with extreme caution. Wesley called out again as we drew closer. "Hello? We're coming closer to check if you're okay. Please respond if you can hear us." Still no answer. The tent was large, an 8-person model with a canopy extension at the front. The entrance flap was zipped shut. Wesley reached for the zipper, then hesitated, turning to us. "I don't know if we should—" A sound from inside the tent made the decision for us, a distinct thump, like something heavy falling over. Wesley unzipped the entrance in one quick motion and directed his flashlight inside. The beam revealed an empty interior, sleeping bags neatly arranged, personal items organized along the tent walls, but no people. A camp lantern lay on its side, apparently the source of the noise we'd heard. "There's no one here," Maya said, confusion evident in her voice. I stepped closer, examining the scene more carefully. "Look at this," I said, pointing to a coffee mug beside one of the sleeping bags. I touched the side gently. Still warm. Wesley moved his light around the tent's interior, revealing more disturbing details. A book lay open, face down as if hastily discarded. A pair of hiking boots stood ready beside the entrance. A cell phone sat on top of a folded sweatshirt. "They left in a hurry," Wesley observed, his voice tight. "Nobody leaves their phone behind voluntarily." "Or their shoes," Maya added, pointing to the hiking boots. The implications were becoming impossible to ignore. Something had happened to the occupants of this tent, something that had forced them to leave suddenly, without taking essential items. The mountain lions? Perhaps, but why wouldn't they have taken shelter in their vehicle? "We need to get out of here," I said, backing away from the tent. "Now." No one argued. We exited the tent, zipping it closed behind us as if that small gesture of normalcy could somehow counterbalance the wrongness of what we'd found. The mountain lions were no longer visible at the fence line, which presented both relief and a new concern. Where had they gone? "Let's find the road," Wesley suggested. "It has to connect to the main access road eventually." We located a dirt track leading away from the campsite in the opposite direction from where we'd entered. Scout took the lead, seemingly eager to put distance between us and the abandoned tent. Each of us was lost in thought, processing what we'd seen and what it might mean. After walking for about 5 minutes, the dirt track widened and joined a more established gravel road. Looking around, I realized we were approaching Snivelly Hot Springs from the opposite direction. "I know where we are," I said with relief. "Our camp is about half a mile that way." We quickened our pace, drawing comfort from the familiar route and the knowledge that our friends were nearby. As we rounded the final bend, the glow of our campfire came into view, along with the welcome sound of voices and laughter. Bennett was the first to spot us. "There they are," he called out. "We were about to send out a search party." Our friends gathered around as we stumbled into camp, noting our torn clothing and the blood on Wesley's leg. "What happened to you guys?" Isabella asked, rushing forward to greet Scout, who seemed remarkably composed given what we'd experienced. Wesley, Maya, and I exchanged glances, silently debating how much to share. The story sounded bizarre even to us who had lived through it. Would our friends think the mushrooms had caused us to hallucinate or exaggerate the danger? "Mountain lions," I finally said. "2 of them. They trapped us on the trail." The expressions of disbelief quickly turned to concern as we recounted our experience, including the abandoned campsite. Zoe, who had wilderness first aid training, immediately set about cleaning and bandaging Wesley's leg wound and the various cuts we'd all sustained from the barbed wire. "We should report this to the ranger station in the morning," Vincent said when we'd finished our account. "Both the mountain lions and the abandoned camp." I nodded in agreement, but found myself unable to shake the feeling that we'd encountered something beyond a natural hazard tonight. Something I couldn't quite articulate. While the others continued to enjoy themselves around the campfire, I retreated to my car, ostensibly to change into dry clothes. In reality, I needed space to process what had happened. Inside the vehicle, with the doors locked, I finally allowed the full weight of the night's events to crash over me. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. My breathing came in short, painful gasps that couldn't seem to fill my lungs. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cold night air. I recognized the symptoms of a panic attack. I'd had them before, but never with this intensity. The car's interior seemed to shrink around me, and I rolled down the window to gulp the fresh air. Tiny gnats, attracted by the dome light, immediately swarmed through the opening, adding a maddening sensation of insects crawling across my skin. I swatted at them frantically, irrationally, my mind connecting them to the creeping dread that had pursued us through the darkness. For nearly an hour, I sat there, alternating between moments of relative calm and surges of paralyzing terror. Through the windshield, I could see my friends laughing, drinking, seemingly unfazed by the story we'd shared. Even Wesley and Maya had rejoined the group, though I noticed they stayed closer to the fire than before, and Maya kept Scout by her side. Eventually, exhaustion overcame anxiety, and I reclined the seat, intending to rest briefly before rejoining the others. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, morning light was filtering through the windows, and someone was tapping on the glass. "Hey, you alive in there?" It was Jared, concern evident in his expression. I rolled down the window, wincing at the stiffness in my neck from sleeping in the car. Yeah, just needed some space last night. We're packing up, he said. Thought you wanted to get an early start back for work? Work. The thought seemed absurd after what had happened, but I nodded mechanically. Right, give me a few minutes. As our group broke camp, a ranger's vehicle pulled into the area. Vincent had made good on his promise to report our encounter, using someone's satellite phone to call the ranger station at first light. The ranger, a weathered woman in her 50s named Officer Mendez, listened to our account with professional interest. Mountain lion sightings aren't uncommon in this area, she confirmed, making notes in a small book. But two together, that's unusual, probably a mother and nearly grown cub. When we mentioned the abandoned campsite, her expression changed subtly. Can you show me where this was? Wesley, his leg properly bandaged now, offered to lead her to the site. They departed as the rest of us finished loading our vehicles. I should have felt relief as we prepared to return to civilization, but something nagged at me, a sense of unfinished business, of questions unanswered. Before leaving, I approached Maya, who was securing Scout in Bennett's truck. Do you think those people are okay? I asked quietly. From the tent? Maya's eyes met mine, and I saw in them the same uncertainty I felt. I don't know, she admitted. I keep thinking about that warm coffee mug. Whatever happened, it happened quickly. We embraced briefly, sharing an unspoken understanding of how the night had changed us. Some experiences create bonds that don't require explanation. I drove back to Portland alone, having decided to leave early as planned, despite the absurdity of worrying about my job after facing death. The highway stretched before me, sunlight making the events of the previous night seem distant and dreamlike. But whenever I closed my eyes, even to blink, I saw those glowing predator eyes staring back at me from the darkness. Upon reaching the city, I called my supervisor to explain my absence, fabricating a story about car trouble. It didn't matter. I was informed that my position had been filled that morning, company policy for no-shows. Under normal circumstances, I would have been devastated. Instead, I felt only numbness, followed by a strange sense of liberation. In the days that followed, I learned from Jared that Officer Mendez had found the abandoned campsite exactly as we'd described it. The registered campers, a couple from Washington State, were reported missing when they failed to return from their trip. Their vehicle remained at the site, their personal belongings undisturbed inside their tent. No trace of the couple has ever been found. The official report suggested they may have encountered the same mountain lions we did, with a less fortunate outcome. But this explanation never satisfied me. The lack of signs of struggle, the warm coffee, the missing shoes, these details haunted my thoughts. I never went camping again after that night. The trauma manifested in unexpected ways, a fear of darkness that had never troubled me before, an inability to sleep without a light on, panic attacks triggered by sounds similar to those we'd heard in the wilderness. I sought therapy, which helped manage the symptoms but couldn't erase the fundamental way that night had altered my perception of safety in the world. 3 years have passed, but every full moon still fills me with inexplicable dread. I've refused all invitations that might take me back to remote areas, especially at night. My friends have largely stopped asking, accepting without fully understanding that something in me broke that night at Snively Hot Springs. Sometimes I wonder if it was really just mountain lions we encountered in the darkness. The rational part of my mind insists it was. Dangerous predators, but natural ones, operating according to their instincts in their native habitat. Yet in my dreams, I still see those eyes reflecting our flashlight beams, and they seem to contain something more than animal hunger. An intelligence, a purpose that defies explanation. Whatever stalked us under that nearly full moon on Friday the 13th took more than just my job and peace of mind. It took my certainty about the world and my place in it. Some dangers can be escaped physically while continuing to pursue us in ways we never anticipated, through the darkest corners of our minds where reason fails and primal fear reigns eternal.